The Mediterranean island of Malta is home to some of the oldest sacred sites in the world. Built over 5,000 years ago by a people known only as the Temple culture, these mysterious monuments have perplexed experts for centuries.
They have a very elaborate civilization. However, there came a point in time at around 2300 BC where it wasn't good enough anymore.
The Temple people flourish for 1,000 years, but then suddenly vanish, generating one of the greatest mysteries of ancient history. Now, for the first time ever, an expert team is trying to discover who these people were and what caused them to disappear.
Our goal was to tie in how these enormous megalithic buildings came into being and why they came to a crashing end.
Some theories suggest that climate change and revolution caused the culture to collapse. Others believe a cataclysmic meteor event made life unsustainable. Now, the ancient sacred sites of the Temple people are revealing fascinating clues to their extraordinary story. The ancient sacred temples of Malta are among the oldest on Earth. Built between 3,500 and 2,500 BC, they predate Stonehenge and the pyramids of Egypt by many centuries. The remains of at least 30 of these incredibly sophisticated temples can still be found scattered across Malta and her sister island, Gozo.
Who else in the Neolithic period is capable of doing anything as sophisticated as that?
For centuries, the temples have been places of riddle and mystery. But now, working with a team of archaeologists and scientists, Professor Caroline Malone has embarked on a groundbreaking project. The aim is to decipher the secrets of the Temple people and discover why, after flourishing for over 1,000 years, the people suddenly vanished without trace. "10 miles from the capital city of Valletta stands an unassuming building. Deep within, under a state-of-the-art humidity control system, lies one of the most remarkable sacred sites in the world. This is the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, built by the mysterious Temple people over 5,000 years ago. This ancient hand-cut labyrinth descends more than 30 feet below ground.
They're only using stone and bone tools at the time, so it wouldn't have been easy to carve out such intricate spaces.
Despite the passing of 5 millennia, incredibly, some of the walls still display complex patterns painted in red ochre.
We have to imagine, without electricity, they would have used torchlight, flickering light, which would have created shadows, which would seem as if they're moving.
Excavating tons of rock, carving intricate chambers, and painting them in ochre. Why would the ancients go to so much trouble? When the Hypogeum was first discovered in 1902, some chambers were filled with human bones so old that most disintegrated on touch. But one thing was clear.
These are below-ground, protected burial grounds, which are temples for the dead.
Few bones survived in Hal Saflieni. But Professor Malone has discovered another Hypogeum on the island of Gozo, just north of Malta. This 5,500-year-old sacred site is known as the Shara Circle.
This site was a burial site for 20, 30 generations of people. Probably 1,500 years of almost continuous family burials.
From Shara, the team excavate tens of thousands of human bones. They are the precious remains of approximately 800 temple people. They are now stored at the National Museum of Malta. Here, osteoarchaeologist Dr. Bernadette Mercheka spends her days face to face with the temple people.
These particular individuals are around 3,100 BC till about 2,500 BC roughly. Very, very old and very well preserved, as you can see. They give me a glimpse of the population at the time.
Dr. Mercheka's studies begin to reveal the nature of the people's burial process. Loved ones are carried into these underground spaces, and here an extraordinary ritual begins. In a process known as excarnation, the dead are left to rest in the hypogeum for many months until all flesh falls from their bones.
Someone would have died and they would have been placed in display for a period of time. Then, as the body disintegrated and dissolved, they were taken apart and redistributed. The monuments were a capsule in which the individuals placed as a representation of the long-enduring community.
We can only imagine being there would have not been very comfortable. There were dead people rotting away in these spaces.
Although thousands of years have passed, many intriguing mysteries remain in these ancient sacred sites. Among them, a strange orifice deep in the Hal Saflieni hypogeum. Known as the Oracle Hole, it appears to be designed to generate a startling sound effect.
When someone speaks into it, the sound reverberates across the site.
It booms around an amplified sound all around the site. In fact, it's terrifying. It would have been a very extraordinary experience to listen to this.
In Wesleyan University in Connecticut, acoustic neuroscientist Professor Psyche Louis is studying the impact this sound effect can have on the human brain.
The sounds recorded in the hypogeum were very rich with many frequency components. They have a very repetitive nature. Over the course of that repetition, our brains start to form these predictions, and that's tied to the auditory and the reward systems.
These reverberations cause the brain to produce endorphins and pleasure chemicals like dopamine.
And at the end of those sounds, that's when there's a rush of dopamine.
Professor Louis has discovered that sounds recorded in the hypogeum resonate at 150 hertz. This is known as high gamma activity.
Researchers have shown high gamma activity, which is over 100 hertz, is really linked to conscious awareness. You're really using the sound to tune a large group of people together to serve a social purpose.
It appears that the temple people are using sound to generate transcendental experiences during their burials.
It might be somewhat analogous to the electronic dance music that you hear today.
Underground, with strange sounds and patterns dancing on the walls, burials become a powerful sensory experience.
a lot of the experience people might have had going into these rather gruesome places with the burials of their ancestors all around them, the reeking smell of perhaps slightly rotting bodies. You'd have needed to be almost a little bit high. Perhaps they even ate some magic mushrooms before they went down. It was very sensory, positively psychedelic.
Hearing these very rich and very repetitive sounds, and then the smell of rotten flesh and all these other sensory experiences that are coming together in our brain. So all those together to really drive to religious trance-like state.
Such transcendental practices suggest that the temple people are worshipping a mysterious entity. And among the bones at Hal Saflieni, they leave behind a tantalizing piece of evidence. A tiny icon known as the Sleeping Lady. The Sleeping Lady is just one of many voluptuous figurines found within Malta's sacred sites. While they have mystified experts for centuries, Professor Malone believes these icons may provide important insights into how the temple people live their lives.
I think there could be a sort of nostalgia for a past that existed when people were fed better. Perhaps some of the corpulent figures that we see relate to a memory of when times were better.
Professor Malone's theory is that the figurines may not only hold the key to how the temple people survive so successfully in this rocky land, they may also help reveal why these people vanished from the face of the earth. The temple people disappeared from the island of Malta sometime around 2300 BC. Though their disappearance has long been shrouded in mystery, the search is on to see if they might have left clues behind in their ancient temples, which might explain why they disappeared. Built around 3400 BC, Gigantea on the island of Gozo is the oldest of the Maltese temples. Gigantea has confounded academics for centuries. What was its function? How could the temple people living in such a harsh landscape have developed a society so sophisticated that it was capable of building temples so magnificent and complex? A groundbreaking team of archaeologists and scientists is now trying to crack these mysteries. At Gigantea, they discover something highly significant about the ground on which these temples stand.
The temples were deliberately situated on some of the best agricultural soils.
The team believes their soil may have been the secret that enabled the temple people to survive in this rocky land for so long. Rain rarely falls in Malta. Rivers can be dry all year long. Good soil is scarce. Samples of the soil from Gigantea are flown to Queen's University in Northern Ireland. Here, forensic archaeologist Dr. Rowan McLaughlin undertakes detailed studies.
In the soil, we were able to discover charred seeds. We know they dated to prehistory because we were able to radiocarbon date each individual seed.
Dr. McLaughlin places selected seed samples into an accelerator mass spectrometry particle collider.
The AMS works by converting the sample into a particle beam, and this particle beam gets accelerated, literally to speeds approaching the speed of light.
The quantity of carbon-13 atoms in the seeds is compared to calibrated time-frame models. The results prove the seeds are 5,000 years old. The seeds Dr. McLaughlin has studied are the very seeds the temple people use to grow their food.
These seeds tell us that people brought to Malta what we call the Neolithic package, a suite of domesticated animals and plants that they grew on the islands and with them built up a subsistence base to their economy.
Further soil analysis reveals that the ancient farmers succeed in generating highly sophisticated farming systems. They produce barley, beans, lentils, and fruit, and meat and dairy from livestock. It is this diverse and fulfilling diet that allows their rich culture to develop.
They were trying, through experiment, to cherish the ground on which they lived. They were very resilient, but they also realized they need to be guardians of the land in which they resided.
Incredibly, isotope analysis allows the scientists to discover exactly what nutrients these 5,000-year-old seeds drew from the soil in which they were planted. The results show that the temple farmers lace their dry soil with fertile manure.
The soil has been worked and cut and filled, and manure and other materials added to it to improve its fertility.
The archaeological team has cracked a crucial piece of the puzzle. The reason the temple people survived so successfully here for over a millennium is thanks to their finely honed skills as farmers.
They understood the quality of the soil they had, how little there was of it, and how they had to maintain it and nurture it.
The team must now explore why, at a time when most humans are building and living in primitive hovels, the temple people decide to build such impressive sacred sites. An extensive excavation of Gigantea is undertaken, and soon, more secrets of the ancients begin to emerge.
Over to my right, we excavated a platform behind the white wall, and there we discovered some very interesting understanding of how the pilgrims approached the monument.
Dr. Stoddard and the team find the remains of a great ramp leading to the temple. The people clearly see their approach to the temple as highly significant. On the temple's facade, another unique feature helps bring this ancient world into sharper focus.
We're now looking at the facade of the temple, and a very particular feature of this facade is this display platform which runs right across the front.
Fallen boulders now hide most of the platform at Gigantea. But platforms have also been found at other sacred sites across the islands. Built in 2800 BC, today Tarshin Temple is protected from the elements by a massive tent. Even after 5,000 years, it remains a testament to the skills and artistry of the temple culture. Here, as in Gigantea, a huge platform runs on either side of the entrance. The team believes these platforms serve a crucial ritual function. They are used by the temple people to display the bounty of their harvest. The picture becomes clearer still when the team examines the interiors of the temples. Here they discover holes bored through upright rock slabs at heights of between 3 and 5 feet, the exact height of a goat or cow. The team realizes they must be tethering holes.
You can actually imagine a large animal placed below the hole itself.
When the clues are pieced together, an unprecedented vision emerges from the ancients' lives and ritual ceremonies. Having laid some of their harvest on the external platforms, livestock is then led inside. The temple interiors are divided into chambers, some of which feature altars. Some of these altars have been found to have traces of charred flesh. The people are sacrificing animals.
We are bringing in live animals. We are dismembering them. We're retaining certain parts, but we are also returning other parts to the earth. So in that sense, we are reproducing the life-giving qualities of the earth.
Not only do the temple people develop sophisticated methods of growing food, they also develop complex rituals to honor their harvest. At the Cordine III temple site, the archaeologists discover another oddity, an 8-foot-long stone trough. Its unique shape suggests it may be a massive grain grinder, or perhaps a device for cooking large amounts of food. At nearby Tarshin, a bowl is found so large that it could have been made to hold a huge quantity of food, perhaps to feed many people at once. Together, the evidence points to a startling conclusion. These sacred sites are no normal places of worship. They are designed to celebrate food, to sacrifice to nature, and to share the bounty among many.
Sacrifice would have been a very momentous event, perhaps once in a long period of time. And when that happened, it would have created a bountiful quantity of food which would need to be consumed very, very quickly. There were no fridges, but the benefit of that was a very good feast.
The clues allow the team to form a rich picture of the people's lives. The carefully nurtured fruits of the land are harvested, sacrificed, and celebrated at their temples. The food is then shared by the community together in great feasts.
Humans always like to come together, to break food together, to drink together. And we see it in every community and every age.
It was a stable time. It was economically stable, and it was culturally stable.
We like to see this society as being, immensely cooperative and friendly and sharing the lot. They had to share ostensibly to keep everybody on board.
Their unique approach to sharing enables the people to thrive here, peacefully for centuries, and build temples unprecedented for their time. But their feasts may also resolve another mystery. The temple people's unique figurines have long been thought to be fertility goddesses.
Fertility would have played a very important role for the Neolithic people. We are talking about a period where fertility of themselves, the crops, and their animals would have been of great importance.
But as well as embodying fertility, the corpulent figures may also express what these people want to look like. Studies of their bones reveal that the people are lean and fit from the toil required just to grow enough food to stay alive. Being overweight may have become their ideal.
Corpulence does not represent biological reality. We have the bones to show that this was not the case. In reality, such was the fragility of these islands that corpulence was an ideal that was never achieved.
So probably the aspiration always is that the ancestors are in another world where they are very well fed.
Conscious of the precarious nature of their food supply, the people become obsessed with eating. Theirs is not so much a cult of fertility, it is a cult of fat. But new research reveals how, despite outward signs of abundance, their fragile soil is weakening. The entire civilization is teetering on the brink. Today, Malta is home to hundreds of Christian churches. It is said that there are as many churches on the island as there are days in the year. Many villages have more than one. Every year, the people gather at their village church to celebrate festas, communal celebrations of food and feasting that are unique to Maltese culture.
Every village will have the festa. Ritual is about that celebration of life.
While too much time has passed to suggest that these modern festas have any direct connection with the feasts of the ancient temple people, certain similarities are intriguing.
There's wonderful parallels, whether it's through saints or whether it's through gods. It's a ritual process of remembering the past, and food and drink is fundamental to the way people celebrate.
Villagers spend their year preparing for the festa, devoting great energy and resources to holding their feasts. Every village stages dramatic firework displays. Most fireworks are homemade, each village competing to put on the best show. Similarly, 5,000 years ago, each temple community competed with its neighbor to show that it could stage the best feast and build the finest temple. And while each village in modern Malta chooses a specific Christian saint to honor with their festa, so each ancient temple family chose a special animal as their icon. In Tarshin, it was a bull. In Gigantia, it was the snake. Through their temples, each clan can express their identity, their strengths, their power, and their wealth.
In the prehistoric past, there were competing representations that were working with and against each other to a common good.
Ancient people, just like modern people today, really like to get together, they like to have a bit of a party, and to worship.
As the archaeological team continues to crack the mysteries of the ancient temple people of Malta, they are discovering that their sacred sites are not just places of worship. They are also places in which to venerate and consume food. But Professor Malone believes the temples also have another important function.
I think the temples may well have operated as stores, because there's many hidden compartments and shelves and places, so they may have been centers almost of redistribution.
Their sacred sites literally sustain life. Such a vital function would have been overseen by an elite caste of sacred priests. The importance of the priest's role in society is confirmed when the archaeological team continues to excavate the Shara stone circle on Gozo. Shara was first excavated in the early 1800s, a moment immortalized by the archaeologist in charge, Charles Brocktorff. Brocktorff digs into the circle and reveals some burial chambers, but it turns out he had barely scratched the surface.
When we first came here, this was a circular field surrounded by a rubble wall with a few large stones in it, and it grew broad beans. And it was farmed by an old man called Micheli, and he didn't have any idea what was here, and neither did we.
For 7 years, Professor Malone and her team excavate the Shara circle. They find that Shara is another hypogeum, an underground burial site. In all, 220,000 bones are discovered, the remains of 800 people. Upon entering the tomb, the team were amazed to find the chambers thick with red ochre.
I remember vividly Professor Malone came out covered in red. They're almost like lobsters as they appeared.
Why there was so much red clay pigment everywhere was just one of the mysteries that the team wanted to crack in their efforts to shine new light on the temple people's burial process.
You'd have come from the bright light into the semi-dark. There would have been sound and echoing, splashing water, some drums and people crying and howling. It would have been overwhelming.
The excavations at Shara reveal another compelling insight. It turns out that presiding over funerals was not the only task the priests had to perform in these dark underground cemeteries.
When we look at the burial monuments, we can see that people arrive as intact people and then are gradually dismembered and turned into ancestry.
The team notices that the priests arrange bones at Shara in a very distinct manner. After the skeletons are broken apart, the individual bones are then placed in specific piles within the burial chambers. On studying these bones, Dr. Mercheka confirms another highly unique aspect of the temple people's rituals.
You can see that the bone is red, and you can see that even within the bricks.
Once the flesh has rotted and the bones are separated, the priests then cover all the bones with great quantities of red ochre.
They associate the use of ochre with the symbolism of blood, of being reborn.
Shara delivers another unexpected find: a collection of sacred ritual puppets.
These are some of the most exciting objects I've ever found in my career. Our interpretation of these is that they take the form of the development of life.
Ranging from rough-hewn to finely finished, these figurines are thought to express the cycle of life from birth and innocence to maturity and death. Dr. Stoddard's theory is that priests held these figurines around their undecorated waists during burial rituals, perhaps to summon the gods to watch over the dead.
The governing purpose was to say, in life we are individuals, but in death we are part of a community that never dies.
As the investigations continue, the world of the temple people becomes ever clearer. Elite priests preside over ceremonies of death and care for the ancestors. The priests also control the storage and distribution of food. And they arrange great feasts for the extended clan in times of plenty. The priests have ultimate power. They are masters of life and death. For more than 1,000 years, the priests managed to ensure the people thrive in this beautiful but challenging environment. But then, suddenly something goes badly wrong. New science is now revealing how, after years of plenty, the temple people's crops begin to fail. In the face of chaos and possible starvation, the people rise up. One of the most extraordinary cultures of the prehistoric past is about to collapse. High on a cliff on the southwest coast of Malta, two ancient sacred sites stand watch over the Mediterranean Sea. Covered with canvas tents to protect them against the elements, they are known as Hagarkim and Manidra. As with other temples, the temple people use these magnificent sacred sites to store and venerate food and to hold communal feasts. But archaeologists have discovered evidence here that points to another sacred aspect of the ancient culture. On the hill above Manidra, hand-cut reservoirs show that for the temple people, one resource was treasured above all: water.
Here at Manidra, there's a group of rock-cut cisterns which may well be originally created at the same time that these monumental buildings are being raised.
Dr. Ruben Grima is an expert on the importance of water throughout Maltese history.
In any human society, water is absolutely fundamental and essential. You can't have human life without a source.
In the rocky land of Malta, rainfall is scarce. Natural springs are often venerated as sacred sites. Some springs have chapels built over them to protect the water's life-giving properties.
Looking at the way water in caves was given sacred significance and carefully collected, it's no longer just water. it becomes very, very special water.
Near the village of Mosta, a 400-year-old Christian chapel is built around another natural spring.
There's this little dribble of water. You just get a few drops every minute.
In medieval times, these sacred drops of water, which seemed to spring magically from the rock all year long, were the sole preserve of the local ruling landlord and his family. The archaeologists believe the temple people also held the water to be sacred. All temples feature strange holes in their floors. Archaeologists call them libation holes, small pits into which water is poured, giving thanks for the earth's bounty.
The whole idea of this ritual is to keep that agricultural fertility. I think we can see the temple as an expression of the cycle of life. We have a sense of security.
Through water libation ceremonies, the temple people attempt to ensure the stability of the ecosystem. But it seems that in the later years of their civilization on Malta, the precious ecosystem begins to collapse. The temple people flourished on the arid island of Malta for over 1,000 years. Despite little rainfall, they managed their sparse water supply, ensuring the fertility of the land. But then, something drastic happens. Around 2350 BC, the climate takes a sudden and dramatic change for the worse. Frequent flash storms begin to pound the rocky island, flushing the farmers' treasured soil down the slopes and heralding disaster. The farmers are forced to carry their soil back up to their farms as the intensity of these storms increases.
There could not have been any soil on the side of the hills unless it was physically brought from the bottom of the valley up to the top again.
Evidence for the strain of this repetitive work has been found on the people's skeletal remains.
This is a carpal. It's coming from the wrist, where we have this polishing between one bone and another. The soft tissue has worn out and there's bone-to-bone contact. So these people were in pain. They were using their hands. This is extreme.
The bones also tell another story. It appears that in the final centuries of the temple culture, the population increases as a greater number of migrants comes to the island.
This skull is basically showing us particular cranial morphology. You have this bulging effect, we call it the bunning effect on the cranium. This might suggest that these people were coming from a different location in the Mediterranean. It could be Africa, it could be other areas.
The increasing population requires larger and richer harvests to feed them all. But every time the soil is washed away, it weakens as precious nutrients are depleted. Sudden rainstorms are not the only disaster that climate change inflicts upon the people.
So you would have had very rapid changes between one regime, a very wet regime, and a very dry regime.
The climate grows hotter and hotter. Scientific analysis of the soil reveals the tragedy that is unfolding for the temple people.
By looking at the pollen trapped in these soil samples, we can see that the amount of vegetation in the landscape got less and less. It was getting drier and drier and drier.
We can see fewer and fewer trees in the landscape. We can see more and more sort of weedy scrub. This place is drying up. Climate change really did affect the world they lived in.
What happened at 2300 BC, however, was unprecedented. At the end of the day, their practices were not sustainable, and their culture finally crumbled.
It really has enormous resonance for us today because soil is the base of our own civilization. Just think of, the Midwest of America and the Dust Bowl that was created in the 1930s because the prairies were cleared and turned into plough soil. And it just dried up and it blew away. If we can't grow agricultural crops, we are all dead.
As their crops fail, the temple people begin to starve. The delicate balance of nature they had tried to maintain through animal sacrifices, constant toil, and water rituals is failing. Evidence found in the architecture of Tarshin Temple appears to show what happens next. In the final years of the temple culture, the priests close themselves off from the common people.
In the later period, it does look as though some of the entrances were closed. Maybe some of the environmental threats were leading to difficulties, and their reaction was to try and maintain their position of power.
In a desperate attempt to maintain control, the priests begin to seal the temples and the food supplies from the people.
Therein lie the roots of the end of the temple period. Maybe the priests were trying to press their authority too greatly. If you press the case too far, the whole thing could come down like a pack of cards.
When the cultural transition occurred, it occurred suddenly and permanently. There was no going back.
For 1,000 years, the temple people have thrived on the island of Malta. Now, their life and culture is failing.
There was a breakdown in society. Perhaps food and social controls were not being as regulated as they were before. Perhaps things are beginning to crack up.
With their harvests failing, the people are desperate.
We never know when a culture comes to an end when we're living in it. And what we see is a rather abrupt change. They're around 2400, 2300 BC.
There may well have been this social collapse or this ritual collapse, this sort of Marxist, the revolt of the population.
Human remains dating to this late temple period reveal signs of tragedy and distress.
We note from the buried evidence the enormous mortality of children. Up to 50% of the bodies found were those who had not reached adulthood. This gives a vision of Malta of the time where you would have grown up not knowing whether your sister and brother would have lived longer than tomorrow.
In just a few decades, the temple culture disappears entirely from the island. One theory is that faced with starvation, many are forced to migrate.
There could well have been an episode of migration from Malta to neighbouring regions, Sicily and North Africa, because the islands were no longer capable of sustaining a large population.
Now, a dynamic new theory seeks to explain how and why the climate changed so radically. Some scientists believe a major cataclysmic event may have thrown the planet's ecosystem into chaos. Evidence is found in dendrochronology, the science of tree ring dating.
In 2354 BC, we have this strange pattern occurring in this tree. When we actually looked at this sample, you see that the vessels within it are becoming so small that they're no longer visible with the naked eye. So that implies that the tree was really suffering.
The same anomaly is found in trees across Europe around 2350 BC, the very time that the Temple people were suffering under extreme climate change.
Climate change was extreme, it was dramatic.
One scenario suggests that a giant volcano erupts, sending vast clouds of ash into the sky, starving vegetation of sunlight and humans of food. But some astrophysicists, including Dr. Johnny McEnany, propose another possibility.
The other option to get dust into the atmosphere would be to bring it down from above in a cosmic impact. There might have been a giant comet within the inner solar system that went under a number of disintegrations.
Meteor strikes would cause tidal waves, earthquakes, and raining ash. The Epic of Gilgamesh, an oral myth from the 3rd millennium BC, speaks of such darkness and turmoil. A black cloud arose from the horizon. The thunder god Adad rumbled, and storm gods went over mountains and land. Everything turned to blackness.
There was some impetus to the change, such as the Earth being bombarded by debris from outer space.
The temple culture is not alone. Early civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt also collapse at this time. DNA studies are showing that across Europe and Asia, people begin to migrate in huge numbers, perhaps fleeing disaster. The DNA shows that many migrants suffer from one of the most devastating diseases known to man: plague. In the same century that sees the Temple people collapse, 1 in 4 people in Eurasia dies from the disease. If plague reached Malta, it would have decimated the island. A discovery made at the Shara Circle may shine light on what happens during the last years of the temple culture.
Well, we have various factors that might suggest the failure of this society. One is the possible intentional destruction of a large figure, a beautiful figure, a skirted stone figure, that we found scattered over this area in about 40 pieces. There's this implosion of the social order.
And what is more dramatic than upturning the powerful objects that worked so well before and turning them into something else that is damaged and no longer powerful?
Sometime around 2300 BC, the temple culture comes to a sudden end. Climate change, soil erosion, and famine forced this peaceful people to abandon their homes and temples, never to return.
Malta is a living, ancient story of what might happen in the present world.
Well, no culture lasts forever. Cultures are inherently unstable. They emerge, they rise, they consolidate, they decline, and they disappear.
There can be processes at work in the background that lead to these moments of crises that are extremely subtle and extremely difficult to do anything about until it's too late.
Our own cultures today are just as fragile.
Climate change, overuse of resources, or a cataclysmic meteor impact. There is no absolute consensus about which ultimately sealed the fate of the Temple people. But one thing is certain. Our modern world has much to learn from the sacred sites of Malta and their story of collapse. Perhaps by learning the lessons of this remarkable ancient civilization, we may be able to avert disaster. Or then again, perhaps not.